500 miles on Monday, drive 500 miles back on Tuesday.
I see.
And my body last night, if I was feeling the way I felt last night, there's no way I would be.
Yeah.
But fortunately, I had a very good night's sleep
Good night's sleep, yeah.
in my own bed, and it worked wonders.
Yeah.
I think we might have some other folks coming to join us eventually, but yeah, there. Hey, Rod.
Good morning.
Morning. Here it is. You draw a couple down there.
The confirmation is alert.
Did you get both of them?
Really study.
Oh, did I give you that?
You gave me that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It's
A hoot.
the part in there about Luther is really
Interesting.
pretty outstanding.
Well, you can bone up on the small catechism.
Large catechism.
Oh, if you want the Book of Concord, you got the Book of Concord,
I might have, yeah. What's the content, yeah.
then you can
Augustinian.
look at the whole thing.
That's an Asian creed.
Yeah.
That's not in here though. But that's in the green book, green hymnal.
Greta, can you hear us? Can you speak and talk? And
Please,
Yeah.
what-
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm
Okay.
here. I'm just Googling the readings at the moment.
oh, she's okay.
But yeah, no, I'm here.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and start with a word of prayer. Gracious Lord, we gather in your presence and we hear your scriptures. We give you thanks for the way in which you reveal yourself to us and through the company that we share here today and through our study. Help us to also, through faith, live in the mystery of your creation and your wonders, your grace, to know that your hand is upon us this day and upon our country and upon our community as well. We ask that you continue to make well those who are afflicted by coronavirus or other ailments, and we know that your hand is upon them as well. Bless us in our time and help us to feel the joy of your love this day. In your name we pray. Amen.
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 You know, I worked the election yesterday
I
and
know you did.
I'm in the front. And there's this scripture, it's over
At a church
by the window out in the front.
here.
Here,
Yeah,
here.
here in this church.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've been agonizing, oh, the wrong guy's gonna win, the wrong guy. And then I looked up the scripture and I read the book and God's in charge.
Yeah.
I just gotta have faith in him. That's
What,
it.
how's the turnout here?
We probably had, if not 80%, really close
Of the precinct.
in this precinct.
Which means,
How many is that in people? Yeah.
Well,
50
1,000 out of
people?
1,200.
Oh, really?
oh,
We had
you got
three,
concert.
Constant.
we had only 300 that came physically, but
Oh, yeah.
everybody else voted
Absentee.
absentee
I see.
early. Yeah, we had a big rush at 8 o'clock, and besides that, it just trickled for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
I mean, the media had everybody scared so much that, oh, there's long lines. Well, there was long lines if you wanted to wait 3 hours to vote early,
Mhm.
because there was only one place for everybody in the city to go.
Yeah.
It was pretty civilized here compared to other
Other areas.
Other places, yeah.
Well,
So, well, we get to start with famous Amos. Isn't that a
It's
cookie?
one of my favorite passages. It's, from the 5th chapter of Amos. Alas for you who desire the day of the Lord. Why do you want the day of the Lord? It is darkness, not light. As if someone fled from a lion and was met by a bear. Or went into the house and rested a hand against the wall and was bitten by a snake.
Yeah.
Is not the day of the Lord darkness, not light, and doom with no brightness in it? I despise your festivals. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals, I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream.
Yeah. Glad you're here.
Thank you. Really?
You're resplendent in blue.
Yes.
Blue. That's my favorite.
Am I blue?
Have you been out and seen our new,
What's hard?
have you been out and seen our new blue bridges?
No.
This year,
I have not.
we've got blue bridges now that cross them.
Oh, those, yeah, I don't,
Right.
Blue bridges?
yeah, I'm having a hard time with them.
Huh?
I'm having a hard time with them.
They repainted the Mormon Bridge.
Oh.
It's ugly.
And they painted them in blue. I mean,
Wow.
blue as Rod's
Sure.
release this morning.
It's
Really?
municipal blue.
Very much Creighton blue, you know, and
Well, why can't they just paint it silver or brown or something? It's a bridge.
Blue paint must have been on sale that day.
Yeah, apparently.
I'm sure, you know, I just, although I have noticed that
Orange.
there are other bridges painted in blue that,
Really?
yeah, I'd never noticed it before, but all of a sudden
That
it's
wouldn't have
like,
been my first choice.
Are both structures and both,
both of them are blue.
uh,
Yeah, it took them, the
North-
first one,
north and
the
south.
old one, it took them along because it was, still had lead paint on it, and so they had to strip it and they
the old one.
completely encased it.
Yeah.
And
Even
so
though
they
it was
could get all,
outside, you had to worry about lead paint, even though it was
Yeah.
outside.
well, falling into the river, falling into
Yeah.
the Missouri.
Polluting the river.
So what does that have to do with Amos?
Yeah.
Now, what's the context? What's the context of Amos?
Is it
What is
let,
this context?
let justice roll down like the Missouri River waters
Yeah,
Yeah.
and righteousness like,
Under the blue bridge.
Why so much doom and gloom?
so, I mean, the story of Amos is that he was, you know, a prophet while they were in exile. Yeah, he was one who, this is to the Northern Empire, the Northern Kingdom of,
Find Amos.
this is the Northern Kingdom, what ends up being the 10 lost tribes who are defeated by Assyria.
it's on page 1362.
He is, so Amos is called as he's a
I can usually
shepherd.
find those, but they're small.
And called to bring an ominous message, a message that at this point, especially the kingdom of Israel, especially the northern, they were right on the trade route between Assyria and Egypt, and so they had become very wealthy. And so then Assyria basically attacked them to, it's like, why should Israel be profiting from all of this? And so Assyria attacked Israel. They were able to defeat the northern kingdom, but the southern kingdom was able to survive their onslaught.
So what does,
Judah.
So, but that's the context.
Context,
That's the context.
500.
No, it had been about this, this would have been written somewhere in the 8th century BC.
Oh,
Sometime.
800. Before
so what does justice look like for Amos? compared to what justice looks like when we think about justice.
I'm presuming that he wants them to take care of the poor and the needy, and not have all the wealth just be concentrated in the hands of those few people.
You're gonna have to, with our mask, would you speak up a little?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I know what you mean. No, I think justice to him is taking care of the poor.
The poor.
That's what I would presume. I mean, there may have been all kinds of issues where the poor were being exploited, but I'm guessing.
Yeah,
And the thing that always strikes me about this is, that he doesn't want the sacrifices. God said, "I don't want your sacrifices, I want justice."
uh-huh,
I don't think God ever wanted sacrifices. I think there are little stories all through the Bible that talk about the evil that comes out of sacrifices, starting with Cain and Abel. They thought that sacrifice was the way to go, and it led to this murder. And there's all kinds of other little stories about sacrifice, and Abraham
Yep.
being told not to sacrifice Isaac.
yep. That's a horrible story.
It's a horrible story. The even worse one is the one about Jephthah and his daughter. He actually killed his daughter. Paul holds him up as an example of faith, which I think is a travesty of the idea of faith. He's doing this barbarian custom and kills his daughter.
Yeah. But you go back to the very first sacrifice when Noah and his family come off the boat. And they survived a year on this boat. God's taking care of them, taking care of all the animals, and yet they come off and then sacrifice one of the animals that was on the boat. And God said it was very pleasing, and He approved of it. I mean, that was the very first sacrifice. But then it's just like everything else. We as man pervert what God really wants. And many of do it for our own understanding or try to understand what God really wants. So it's,
I would fully expect a veterinarian to rebuke animal sacrifice.
Well, I'm not a vegetarian, and they eat them.
No, I know.
But I think the preponderance of things in the Bible will show more evil coming out of sacrifice. And you could say, well, maybe man perverted it. I think it was a pagan custom that arose thousands and thousands of years before the Israelites discovered or started having enlightenments about God. And I think it's custom that carried over. And so when people wrote these stories or passed down these stories, they're continuing on with this tradition that had been going on for eons. And I think God keeps trying to tell people, no, this isn't what I want. What I want is for you to treat people well.
Yeah, I think this parallels all the times that Jesus rebuked the Pharisees and the religious leaders of his time of yeah, you are publicly doing all these things right, but in your heart, it's not good. So Amos is telling these people, you're doing all these things that you say are righteous, but they're not actually righteous. Justice is righteous. And yeah, caring for the poor. So it's you can't get lost in doing the public, the outward show of your religiousness or your faithfulness. It needs to be within your heart and what you're actually doing, that those practices don't matter if you don't really mean them.
Yeah, beware of your piety.
But God wasn't rebuking Abraham when he was offering Isaac up on the sacrifice. And God didn't rebuke Abraham for doing that.
But he offered him
A
an option that he had never even considered.
Yeah, a ram.
And I think that's the part that,
Yeah, but to think that Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son, beloved son.
You see, that was a pagan custom. Human sacrifice was going on for a long, long time.
With the Canaanites.
Abraham. And it was a very vile and horrible custom. They would sacrifice their firstborn because they thought that's what was necessary for them to have good crops or hunting or whatever they did. That was a long-term custom. And I think that's where Abraham got that idea, honestly, is this long-term custom. And I think God's just saying, no, human sacrifice is not what I want.
Yeah, that's,
Well, that's what, I mean, these verses from Amos are right in the middle of, him telling Israel, you're done for, it's at the end, and, and he says here that he doesn't like this, and then later on, he talks, or right before this, he talks about, you're not taking care of the. And then you're doing all this good stuff that I don't want, that you think is good. So we need to read more than just these 6 verses or whatever they are. So,
This whole vision of, if you just, you just can't quite imagine. Okay, first of all, I ran from a lion, and then I was met by a bear, and then I put my hand on the wall and was bitten by a snake. I mean, that's-
In other words, you can't get away, no matter what you do, you can't get away.
Well, and in that, just talking about the realities of life in that time.
Well, but he starts out, alas, for you who desire the day of the Lord. Now, to me, the day of the Lord is when Jesus is coming back. And who wouldn't desire the day of the Lord? So this context is for Jewish people who, I don't know, it's to me, it's a lot of negatives that I'm not thinking about when I think about the day of the Lord.
yeah,
But doesn't this, getting back to the sacrificing though, doesn't this lead to the Paschal Lamb of Christ who was sacrificed?
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah.
Well-
Verse 21, it says, I hate and despise your festivals and take no delight in your solemn. It reminds me of when Jesus comes riding in on a donkey in Palm Sunday, and how quickly triumphant entry into Jerusalem turns to the ultimate.
Sacrifice.
Yeah.
It is a sacrifice that God has chosen through Jesus,
Mhm.
through his son. It's not a sacrifice we humans are making. These are sacrifices that are made by humans in order to somehow appease God.
Mhm.
The Israelites were living in great prosperity, and they thought by continuing to do these sacrifices, they were keeping God satisfied. That was their understanding of sacrifice. And if you think of sacrifice in those terms, that this is something I do to keep God happy, we're missing, is what Barb is saying, we end up missing the reality of what God truly wants from us, wants from his people.
Well, I think there's a hierarchy of sacrifices, though. There's Abraham's sacrifice.
There's 2 turtle doves and then there's
The
a ram,
yeah.
and then
Sacrifices, and then there are sacrifices, and if they're done in the, if they're done in the right, with the right motivation, with the heart, not like the scribes and Pharisees in the church, the sacrifices, or the bringing up to date the indulgences of the Catholic Church. There's you run the gamut. And Jesus Christ, that was the ultimate sacrifice by God, obviously. But Abraham was he was immortal, but somehow or other I put him on a little higher pedestal than the scribes and Pharisees.
well, back
Sacrifices.
to justice for Amos. Could it be that sacrifice isn't self motivated to save the self, but rather he wants us to sacrifice for a community.
Right, I don't
And-
think this has anything to do with sacrifice in reality. I think it has to do with your heart.
And
Yeah.
how we give to and love of our neighbor.
How,
As-
and,
And sacrifice has somewhat of a pejorative kind of tinge to it, I think. But when you talk about giving of yourself for the sake of not to benefit yourself, but to benefit your neighbor. Has to be the epitome of this in my mind.
Yeah, it reminds me of last week's Beatitudes. It's sort of like this warning to the people of justice will not be what it thinks you look like, you that have the power and the privilege. Like, be warned that justice looks different than you think it does. In the same way that the Beatitudes are all about turning the world upside down and who has the power and who's being taken care of. I think it reminds me a lot of the Beatitudes in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting, Rod, you mentioned reading the context, but it's interesting reading the 3 verses following in this text and verse 24 and the next 3 verses talk about, that one, the example of that they weren't, and you don't read about the Israelites making sacrifices during their 40 years in the wilderness. They're simply there following their God. And then in the next verse 26, he talks about, essentially making sacrifices, taking up the gods of the Assyrians, the gods of Mesopotamia,
Mm-hmm.
and making. So they weren't just making sacrifices to God; they were making sacrifices to other gods.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And that's
God was only one God of many that they sacrificed, or of several
that's what
that they
Baal
sacrificed to.
Baal,
and Astartes.
And so-
Baal, Baal.
And so, and then the message that runs throughout Amos that he's going to send them into exile.
So while they were in Egypt, they were making sacrifices.
No, while they were in wilderness, while they're in the Sinai,
Sinai, they were.
they weren't. They weren't making sacrifice. They were just living day to day.
They didn't have anything to give. I mean,
No, they didn't have anything to sacrifice.
Well, on their way
They
back.
didn't have anything to give.
they were eating manna.
They were, they were going out and collecting manna in the morning and the afternoon and in the evening and collecting quail and just trusting God to provide them what they needed and without having to make any
They really needed was a compass.
sacrifices to keep God happy.
They needed a map.
Yeah.
And you said quail,
They took the roundabout way.
they were
too.
collecting
I
quail.
know.
Well, that was, God would send them, and I can't remember if it was, he sent them manna in the morning.
And
And I think it was quail in the evening.
Yeah.
Manna was what you got in the morning. You went out and collected manna in the morning.
And quail are so teeny tiny.
Yeah.
My dad used to hunt. And
Yeah.
would shoot
Well,
quail. You hope
and-
that there wasn't any buckshot in it because it pretty much took up the whole thing.
But you stuff it with rice and wild rice. Whoa, goody.
Ah, Well, they were
It's a
good.
delicacy,
Yeah,
quail.
And maybe that's the point of the wilderness, is that God provided. I mean, even if it was a thin,
just enough.
it was very thin living, but it
Yeah.
was,
Hmm.
But then when they finally did get into back to the land of Canaan, the generation had lost knowledge of farming. And so then they go back to chase after the Canaanite fertility gods. So that they thought that it would rain and provide crops. So then you have more sacrifice in the, yeah, like what you're saying.
Yeah, and then now the Assyrians who are, for them, obviously more powerful than
Mhm.
something, so they make sacrifices to the Assyrian gods so that,
I just can't
keep them
imagine
happy.
the pain of sacrificing your own child. I think I would give up believing in that God pretty
Yeah.
quick.
Yeah.
I mean, well, Psalm 70.
I'll read it. Okay. 70th Psalm. Be pleased, O God, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. Let those who seek my life be put to shame and confounded. Let those who take pleasure in my misfortune draw back and be disgraced. Let those who say to me, aha, and gloat over me turn back because of their shame. Let all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. Let those who love your salvation say forever, great is the Lord. But as for me, I am poor and needy. Come to me quickly, O God. You are my helper and my deliverer. O Lord, do not tarry.
It's a rather self-serving song.
Huh?
It's a rather self-serving song.
I don't care about those other people because they have everything they need.
Just
Just
take
come and
care of
help
me.
me.
Yeah.
It starts out the same as Amos does. Let those who take pleasure in my misfortune. I mean, Amos said the lions and the bears and the snakes. And then Psalms, like, it just kind of covers all of those.
I think this was a psalm of David when he was running away from Saul.
Was it, do you think it was David that wrote that?
That's what my Bible says it is.
Oh, okay.
A
be
petition
so.
from David.
Still got it, yeah,
Hmm.
sure.
Well, David was rather self-serving. anyway.
Yes, yes. Well, that just shows us all. He was a great sinner, but he had a heart for the Lord, and God loved him in spite of
Yeah.
his sin. So,
Yeah, but when you can take a slingshot down a Philistine, you're kind of a big man, you're kind of an icon.
well, but was it David's skill or was his faith that God was going to bring him through it that felled Goliath?
Do you know Goliath dies twice in the Bible?
I didn't.
Well,
He does. Don't make me look it up. You can Google that
Yeah.
later. But Goliath, yeah, Goliath. There's a discrepancy.
Oh, maybe
So,
there were two Goliaths.
well, but they're both described the same way though. So
Goliath is a Goliath.
don't call me a Goliath.
Plays on words. Oh,
No. Yeah, I think like this is someone's personal cry for justice or what they think in their life would be justice. And we've all been there. But
Yeah.
If we were as quick to help as we are to cry for help, it'd be a much better word. Last,
yeah,
you are my helper and my deliverer.
oh Lord, but do not tarry.
Yeah.
There's 3 of these Psalms right in a row. Psalm 69 is a prayer for deliverance from persecution. Psalm 70 is a prayer for deliverance from enemies. And 71 is a prayer for lifelong protection and help. So they all, I think they all kind of work together the way they've been organized in the Psalter.
Yeah. I'm just reading this from Bible Gateway, and it says it's for the director of music from David, a petition. So he probably like wrote these collections of songs to be used or something. So I think it was meant as music.
Yeah.
Well, I guess in the, you know, in some ways, yeah, I can see it as being self-serving, but I think the other part of it is also a humble prayer. Isn't blaming God for his, you know, for whatever predicament.
Yeah, he isn't saying, oh God, why did you put me here? Why did you, he's just saying,
You
You
know,
know,
I've got
it
faith,
isn't-
you'll help me.
you know,
Well,
and
yeah,
it's just,
true.
you know, we don't know what's the story? You know, what has led to him being poor and needy? We don't know that. What he is saying is, you know, he is admitting who he is and trusting that God is the one that can help him. For me, there's a lot of similarity in this to spirituality. We can stop blaming others. You know, I mean, that, and stop looking to them, and if they would just change their behavior, I could stop my drinking. Which is where most, nearly all of them are at. You know, and simply say, well, this is who I am. I can't control my drinking. When I try to, it makes my life a mess, and I need to get help.
I don't know, to me, I think about, Jesus said, love your enemies. And this is in direct contrast to that. And I think he's treating God here as a big genie who's you know, he wants God to save him and give shame to his enemies. That's treating God like a genie. He's not saying, God, help me to serve you. I want to serve you, and how can you make it possible for me to serve you? What would you have me do? Which is more in line with Jesus's thinking and teaching. This is not in line with Jesus at all.
Well, looking at they chose this psalm for the lectionary for a reason, and maybe First Thessalonians will help put some perspective and some context behind the psalm too, because Paul is writing to a community that was largely suffering and being persecuted for their faith, and he's trying to give them hope. So this is a really important passage in First Thessalonians. If someone wants to read it, do you have it, Greta?
Sure. Just to double check, 4:13-18.
Yes.
Okay. Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind, who have no hope. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. According to the Lord's word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage one another with these words.
Thank you. Is that NIV, Greta?
Yeah. I always chuckle because Paul has absolutely no clue what
what the eschatological, what that eschatology is going to look like. He is very much influenced by the Greek, probably Aristotle more than anybody. Caught up in the clouds together and meet the Lord in the air. I mean, give me a break. I mean,
Yeah, I see that as a metaphorical statement.
yeah, okay.
I mean, that's how I read that. It's a metaphorical
Sure.
thing. It's a, I mean, Revelation is all picture language, and
Sure.
this is too. Christ coming.
Well, yeah, and you can't. I mean, the thing is, we don't know when that's going to happen or what that's going to look like. All we know is that is the promise of the resurrection and the day of resurrection. That's all we know.
And this, I mean, when you realize too, that this Paul's thinking is based on a 3-tiered universe.
Yep.
This metaphor makes great sense.
Mhm.
In today's world, when we live in a world where, we're told that, not only are there millions of other galaxies, there could even be other universes. How do we, how does any of this, and how does this metaphor make sense to us today?
Yeah. And I mean, I like how N.T. Wright describes this better than anybody when he says it's God's space and God's time, meaning that, we see things dimensionally, but God sees things even more complex than that.
So I have the couple of verses before that, verses 11 and 12 in my Bible that say, and I have them underlined. This should be your ambition, to live a quiet life, minding your own business and doing your own work, just as we told you before.
That's all I want to.
As a result, people who are not Christians will trust and respect you, and you will not need to depend on others for enough money to pay your bills. Now, undoubtedly, this was a time in my life when I was struggling for money,
Yeah.
struggling to live, and I underlined all that, so.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, I don't remember which week or which reading, but in Paul's letter to whoever he was writing, it was the same sort of like, here's the hope of Jesus' return, because he actually thought that it would be really soon in their lifetime. Does that apply here as well? It kind of sounds like, don't worry about those who have died. Jesus is coming soon, and like he's expecting it to be like really soon within their lifetime. And so he's using that to give them hope of like the struggle is worth it. God's coming really, really soon.
That's exactly right, Greta. Yeah, he thought the second coming or whatever was going to happen tomorrow.
Mhm.
And that, I mean, that point makes you wonder, it must have been really bad in Thessalonica for him to say, for these people. I mean, there must have been some torture or something going on for him to write this, and for him to help this community understand that just Christ is coming again. And I wonder, if, there must have been some real doom and gloom going on.
I read a novel once about Paul, and the thing that struck me is when he was saying stuff like this, there was a woman who was narrating. It was told from all kinds of different points of view, and there was this little segment where this woman was narrating, and she had lost her mother, and this gave her the idea that her mother would be taken care of, was going to be resurrected, before her. It gave her so much hope and joy. And I thought, those of us who've been raised to always think that way, it's hard to imagine not thinking that they're just gone. And then you hear this voice saying, your mother who has died is going to come back to life. I mean, what joy that would give a person to hear that.
Oh, Paul, there's a book written within the last 7 or 8 years by Sarah Rudin about Paul. And her point was that we need to take Paul in context of where he was in the relatively pagan world. Where, I mean, murder, assault, rapes going on at that time. That was the Roman way. And so we have to take that in context when he's chastising and trying to bring him up from way down, I mean, they were really these communities were Roman dominated, the Romans were pretty blatant about their assaults and rapes and things like that. So, we take shots at Paul, but Paul was in a different, maybe our world is becoming the same as Paul's world, I don't know, but Paul, you have to take him in the context of where he was.
Exactly.
This is one of the few cities that Paul talks about that still exist in the area. They survived maybe because of their faith.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it still is an interesting place today, apparently, so.
Thessalonica.
Yeah, well, that's on Nike now, or K-I, I think.
It was AE at one time.
That's a
And A.
port.
Yeah.
City.
Port
Yeah.
City, and that's why Paul was there, stop on the way to.
Rome.
Mhm.
I think it probably would have had significance for military too,
Sure.
military and trade.
When you look up the history, one of the Roman people had a big home there in the 4th century, so it's always been a very important port.
Have you been there?
No.
No.
I'd like to.
Yeah.
We need to-
We should take a church trip to
Well, how about
Yeah.
Colossae?
Yeah.
Colossae.
Greece.
Colossae.
Yeah, I don't. But it is,
We can just take the cruise and hit Ephesus, which is
Ephesians.
now, it's got a
Ephesus.
different name now. And all the
Athens.
port cities of the Mediterranean are all that.
Yeah, you eat some olives.
Isn't that where Pastor Miller, did he take
Mediterranean
on
food.
his
He did.
follow Paul's journey?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that'd always been one of his, it was on his bucket list, let's put it that way. It was one of the things.
Yeah.
Well, we've got the parable here. Who wants
Yeah.
it?
Get to preach it, so.
I'll read it.
All right.
Jesus said to his disciples, "Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout, 'Look, here is the bridegroom. Come out to meet him.' Then all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, 'Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out.' But the wise replied, no,
Tough.
there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves. And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the other bridesmaids came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he replied, truly, I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour.
Once again. No, eschatologically speaking, we don't know the day and the hour, it was warning at that time, just like Paul,
It's just the old Boy Scouts motto, be prepared.
Yeah.
So this parable has always bothered me. And there's several reasons it bothers me, and one is the wise ones would not share with the foolish ones. Now, you
Yeah.
contrast that with the story of the widow who put everything she had into the offering basket for the temple. And Jesus is praising her for this act. So she's doing it out of faith. She's giving everything she has. And yet here's these bridesmaids who will not share. And maybe they have very good reason, but you compare that with the widow. And then you look at some other parables where the man holds the feast and the people that he invited didn't come, so he goes out and invites everyone else. And it's this idea of all inclusiveness and welcoming. And so here's this bridegroom who should have known these bridesmaids. Oh, you're late, too bad, go away. It seems opposite to some of the other things that he teaches. I guess my third question is, what are they supposed to be doing to keep awake? They're watching for God. What are they supposed to be doing in the meantime? Does that mean if you're not doing the right thing at the meantime or not, you're out in the cold? I don't know. This whole thing just strikes me as very perplexing.
Well, but even the bridesmaids that were accepted were sleeping also. So I don't think it's just.
Yeah, but they had their oil. They
Right.
were ready,
Yeah,
and they woke up when they shouted.
Yeah, and to me, I agree. I don't understand why the bridesmaids who had the oil wouldn't share, because Jesus told us all to share what we have.
No matter how little you have.
Right, and even in this case, I compare it to the knowledge of Jesus and the fact that, who he is. And we need to share what we have. And because Jesus is saying, truly, I do not know you, to the 5 bridesmaids who didn't have the oil. And, when he comes back, it's going to be too late to know him and accept him. So.
Well, I misspoke before, because here it says, chapter 25, verses 1 to 12, the parable emphasizes the need for watchfulness in the event of an unexpectedly long delay in Christ's coming.
Well, again, all the writers back then had faith that that Jesus was coming back.
But in the event that he didn't come back right away,
Well, it's been
the bridesmaid should have
years.
had enough oil to cope with that eventuality.
Maybe they weren't prepared to wait that long.
No, they weren't prepared to wait that long.
I guess it begs the question, how do you know what it means to be ready?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be ready?
Yeah, I do resonate with there seems to be like a lack of grace here. Barb, who I don't actually know your name. What's your name?
Barb?
Barb.
Yeah,
All right.
Barb.
Nice to
Greta.
meet you, Barb. I totally resonate with that. There's a lack of grace, both from the people that wouldn't share, from the groom not letting them in once they finally return. Right, because I would lean towards grace. Like, what is this a parable actually of? And like, what implications does that mean? Because I want to
Like
be
a lot of law, doesn't it?
grace.
But in this parable,
Matthew.
isn't the bridegroom Jesus?
Yeah.
That's who we
Yeah.
normally speak of and think of.
Right.
And,
So. Je- And so he's gotta be telling us some way about these other bridesmaids weren't ready for him or didn't know him but I'm still concerned about the people who wouldn't share. I mean,
Yeah, but
it doesn't correlate.
grace was an issue. Grace is given at this point. That was a given. Now, what works follow from grace? What do you do after you, Jesus, I think, is saying here, okay, I give you the fact that this we all have grace, we're all extended grace, but what follows after grace? And so the point is that the time could come any time.
So this is the
End
first.
times could be any time.
Yeah, this is the first of three parables that talk about the parousia, or the coming of Jesus, and they're parables of judgment. But it really starts out back in chapter 24, verse 36. But about that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. And
Yeah.
I think it really speaks to the urgency of, and going back to Amos here, maybe, what does it mean to be ready? I think ultimately what Jesus is saying, through this entire discourse, is that it's about being faithful. Isn't about just, Lord, come and save me, like Barb was saying in Psalm 70. It's not just self-serving, but it's about serving others. It's about living for the community, about living for one another. I mean, that's the urgency. And I think this parable, and I think it's really good you pointed that out, Greta, because as a preacher, you look at this and you say, okay, where's the gospel?
Yeah.
Well, could it be that the gospel's already assumed, but that Jesus is really trying to describe the urgency of how we live daily in our baptism?
What follows?
Christianity, faith isn't just about what happens at the end. It's about what happens when you wake up.
The journey.
And I used to, in seminary, I had a professor that was always talking about living out your baptism, to the point where I was like, okay, you said it once, I got it. But he kept reminding us of that, and it starts to dawn on you that every day is a new day to live, new opportunity to be a disciple, and
Renew your baptism.
and that's the urgency. It's not about worrying about the end, about the day and the hour. It's Jesus is telling us to get over that, but to be ready, by serving and loving your neighbor. That's my theology, at least, out of this.
So how much, getting back to, raising that question of context, because Matthew's gospel would have been written 20 years after Paul's letter to the Thessalonians.
Yeah,
And
circa 70.
in the late 70s, early 80s. And also then Matthew's gospel is addressed, my understanding is addressed primarily
Early
to
Jewish Christians.
Christians.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
Jewish Christians
Yep,
who have just experienced the total destruction
of Jerusalem,
of Jerusalem and of their temple.
correct.
They have seen the temple laid flat, which, was, would have taken something
Mhm.
to, it's in terms of how it was built. And so, having been raised in that Jewish, they were still part of that Jewish lineage, part of, what the temple meant to them. Do they make sense of this in light of everything? Their whole web of life has been undercut,
Yep,
destroyed. They're still who
they're
still
worshiping
Jews.
amid
They're
rubble.
Still Jews.
Yeah,
Oh,
And-
and boy, what a good point. Jesus was Jewish,
Right.
and Matthew is even brings out the best Jewish part of Jesus.
well, Matthew was Jewish. I mean,
Yeah, and his was more from the commandments than from the gospel. Even though, and then that's such a good point.
I don't know if I would
After-
agree with that, Don, in that I think this is about grace. It is about
Oh, yeah,
waking up.
grace is given.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Grace
But
is assumed here.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree with that.
We wake up to that, and what you're saying about, do we wake
But-
up
but-
to that grace? Do we wake up to that grace on a daily basis?
Yeah. But the way it's stated here, it could be misconceived, It could be a misconception of it. But
Sure.
what a great point you made is that, it's a shame that all the gospels come first in the New Testament and then the letters of Paul. Actually, Paul's letters all happen before the gospels,
yeah.
and
Well, chapters 24 and 25 of Matthew are commonly understood to be probably not commonly, but they're understood to be the eschatological discourse. And there's a series of 5 discourses and 5 narratives in Matthew that echo each other. And those are reflected upon, there's 5 because of the Torah. And so Matthew's writing from he's very Jewish in his understanding,
Mhm.
very Jewish. He's about as Jewish as it gets,
compared with the other apostles.
but he's a Christian Jew.
Mhm.
Christian Jew,
What is eschatological?
Eschatological,
end of times.
end of times.
I have one other
Good
possible
study, yeah.
interpretation from this, which is definitely out of context, but the way that it could possibly make sense to me is, what if Jesus, we're talking about end times, but another way to look at it is that Jesus is already here.
Mhm.
And he's asking us to bring the kingdom of heaven to our surroundings. And if we're not ready, we're not paying attention, we might miss the opportunity to be able to bring that heaven to our surroundings.
Perfect.
You're just not paying attention. And so you miss your chance to shine, to do this in the world. You miss your opportunity. And it doesn't mean you won't have another opportunity some other time, because there's opportunities every day. But you might miss it on that time. And
That's
so
very,
that's how I could see this making sense.
that's very strong Advent theology that you just described.
Oh,
In the waiting for Christ to come, we wait for his birth, we wait for the second coming, but most importantly, we wait for him every day because he's already here. So that's the meat and potatoes of Advent right there that you just described. And it's probably no mistake that we're on Advent's doorstep here,
Right. Well, yeah, there's so much, so much connecting,
Uh-huh.
the anticipation of the coming of Jesus with, with the end times also. I mean, it's that same anticipation is still very real.
Yeah.
And I think, and I think, like you say, if we aren't ready to live today fully in God's grace, how can we, be ready to experience the opportunities God's going to give us to serve others? That's
what Amos calls justice.
and it was, right now we're going through, we have our son-in-law staying with us because his mother just had quintuple bypass surgery. And his comment to me this morning was, he said, I wasn't expecting my mom to be so crabby.
So what?
So crabby. He said, I thought at least she would say at least once during the day, I'm really glad to be alive. Like she was, in the midst of the pain and the agony of going through this, terrific surgery. She wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
Oh,
She isn't able to say, going through this is worth it. She isn't there yet.
I'd be crabby too, I'll tell you.
Well, yeah, and
When
realize
trouble.
that,
Right, yeah, I've been in that same situation. I remember Lowell had a surgery once and I was so worried about it. I was so worried, because he had Parkinson's, I was worried his brain wasn't gonna be right.
Right.
And I was so anxious to get up there and, see him, and I'm just filled with this joy that he's made it through this surgery. And the first thing he says is, it's hot in here. And then I knew he was okay. It's always hot. So,
so I think,
I think what we're all talking about is, we're all looking forward to heaven, but why wait? Why not live like heaven today?
yeah,
Let-
heaven's
let-
among us today.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. If you
What they
really,
can do.
Is it really kind of like heaven on earth right now?
well, if you accept Jesus Christ as your savior, you should be.
Well, and it's,
well, I see what I would think there, John, is, no, it's not heaven, but every time you do something kind for somebody, you bring a little piece of it to that person.
mhm.
That's, I guess that's how I see it. It's like a cup of water in the desert. Somebody's in the desert, you give them a cup of water,
yeah,
and it's enough to make them survive, a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I wish our society understood that.
Yeah.
I wish our culture understood that.
Well,
Look
it's,
at this book, and there's so many instances of people of faith, falling away and deciding, oh, we gotta kill our neighbors, or we gotta do this, or,
It's a book of life. It's a book of,
well,
and it's what, I think that's where we are today. I mean, we were much closer to being a Christian community 50 years ago than we are today in some ways, and in other ways, but there's a lot of hate going around.
A lot of division.
Yes, yeah, and instead of us coming together, which,
Yeah.
Fear, it's all fear.
Yeah.
Fear is what drives us apart, I think.
yeah,
well, and change, and I mean, when I look back at, it is such a different world than what I grew up in, 70 years ago. It's such a different world, and I think.
70 years ago, remember 70 years ago, the McCarthy hearings in Congress, congressional hearings? You talk about divisiveness.
Division and
Well, yeah,
hatred.
and then there was Vietnam, and Vietnam happened out of fear of communism. That was
Oh, yeah.
totally fear-born.
Yeah, it was, and
Cold War, 70 years ago, look where we're starting,
Yeah,
my
we
goodness.
went through the, and And so how do we give our children and our grandchildren hope that, yeah, we can live in this, we can face the changes that are coming, because I think there are monumental changes coming for our kids and grandkids. And what's going to help now be prepared for those kind of changes?
Just the demographics. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll be interested when the census data comes out. I'm always fascinated by that.
I'm sorry, I gotta get going.
Take care.
All right. Good to see ya.
Thank you, thanks for inviting me.
Good to have you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I did not know you were meeting until Carol
Oh, my
watching me in
God.
church and said.
We're Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So,
Yeah, do we want to close with Lord's Prayer?
Yes.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever.
Amen.
Greta, thanks for joining us this
Yes.
morning,
and anybody else who was out there.
and anybody else who is out there
Or will be out.
or will be out there.
Yeah.
All right,
All right.
bye-bye.
Bye.
I call it joy.